Dobry wieczór, kochani. Zaczynam ciut wcześniej ze względu na to, że chciałabym przedstawić Sally, zanim jeszcze się włączy. Mam nadzieję, że ja już rozpoczęłam tą transmisję. Specjalnie połączyłam się ciut wcześniej, żeby przedstawić Wam Sally. Co prawda wysyłałam Wam link do opisu jej pracy, w czym była, w jakich projektach zaangażowana, jakie studia skończyła, natomiast chciałam ją wcześniej przedstawić, żebyśmy nie tracili czasu ze względu na to, że mamy tylko pół godziny z Sally i nie chciałabym po prostu tracić tego cennego czasu na przedstawianie jej. Oczywiście poproszę ją o dopełnienie tej mojej informacji, natomiast po polsku powiem Wam, czym Sally się zajmowała. Oczywiście jest to związane bezpośrednio z tym, co teraz robi, ponieważ ona już licencjat kończyła na Uniwersytecie w Cornell i była to nauka o żywieniu, natomiast jak sama pisze w opisie swojej historii, niestety ta nauka o żywieniu, jak często spotykamy się z tym również w Polsce, miała niewiele wspólnego z tym, jak ona się żywi teraz i jak ona pomaga pacjentom, więc jakby była to podstawa do tego, aby mogła rozpocząć tą swoją karierę zawodową związaną z żywieniem. Natomiast niestety, ale musiała wszystkie te informacje, które uzyskała zarówno podczas licencjata, jak i podczas magisterki, musiała je, że tak powiem, zrewidować i zacząć trochę od nowa, czyli przestać żywić się piramidą żywienia, która jest również w Polsce przekazywana osobom, które kończą zarówno medycynę, jak i dietetykę. Także tak to nie Sally Fallon. Prosiłabym zerknąć, z kim mam live'a. Więc Sally Norton. Słuchajcie, czy mnie... O, teraz mam informację, że już można... Okej, dobrze. Jest Sally. Zaakceptowałam prośbę. Hi!
Hello!
Hello! Nice to see you. I'm so happy that we can talk, because last time it was really hard because you didn't schedule this meeting, and today I had some problems with the connection, and I thought, oh my God, it's just impossible. But I have you.
Every good story has hard knocks in it.
Yeah. Sally, thank you very much that I can have you today with my audience, and I would like to ask you, because I already introduced your story, and I've sent to my audience the link to your website. But could you please explain to us, how did you find in your story, in your life, because I've read about your health problems, that it was really, really hard for you, and how did you find this topic of oxalates?
Yes, it's thank goodness for a woman named Joanne Yant. In the United States, 30 years ago, she founded a nonprofit educational organization called the Vulvar Pain Foundation. She has struggled with severe vulvar pain. This is genital pain, and sometimes call it vulvodynia, that is so difficult that you can't function. You cannot sit down. It's just completely distracting. It's awful. And they do terrible things to you. They do surgery and take the glands out of the vagina opening. Then they take a laser and they laser off the surface of the vulva area, and it never works if it's oxalate poisoning. So luckily she found someone to help her, who helped her discover that her pain problem was related to oxalates in her diet. And she was so floored by that she couldn't get help in medicine, that she founded the Vulvar Pain Foundation. And I didn't know anything about this. And interestingly, her organization and where she lives was just 45 minutes from where I worked at the university in North Carolina. And we never connected when I was in North Carolina. And then later I moved 3 hours north, and I'm in Virginia now. And my own health problems included at one point in 2009, this attack of vulvar pain that was short-lived, but really intense enough to be upsetting. And my husband learned about the Vulvar Pain Foundation on the internet. So I didn't have any other options. And you know, lots of things had been going wrong. And this was one I certainly didn't want to keep around. So I ordered her materials and tried to learn from her. But I didn't understand. Interestingly, the Vulvar Pain Foundation found fairly quickly within the first few years of this that other problems with pain, like fibromyalgia and arthritis and these connective tissue disorders got better. All kinds of connective tissue disorders, lichen sclerosis, all kinds of odd things and hard to explain and difficult, if impossible to solve, connective tissue problems would improve on the diet. So they started researching the connective tissue aspect of this too. But I did not understand really this bigger picture that oxalates are causing a poisoning in the body that's harming the way cells work, harming the ability of the body to maintain itself, and can affect any tissue. It's not really about the genitals. It's not just about the skin and so on. It's any tissue. And so it's a much bigger problem of a slow poisoning from foods that I didn't understand at the time. It took more and more suffering and then, you know, understanding. Once you understand when you're eating oxalate, this is a big advantage to you, because now you can get a sense for, is this a factor in my health? Because now you know when you're eating a lot of oxalates, hey, I've been eating sweet potato for months every day and I'm getting worse. My sleep is worse. My mood is worse. My back hurts more. I have a poor performance in the gym or something, and you can start connecting it. So it's not until you start to learn about oxalates in food that you can even imagine that it might play a role in your health.
And could you please tell us, because as you can imagine, many of us suffering, you know, because I've had a lot of problems with my own health. I consider to even kill myself, really, because I was very in a bad shape because of Lyme disease, because of MS, and I couldn't find the reason why all this kind of treatments are failed, you know. And I think that many people suffering because of food poisoning, you know, and we don't know almost anything about it. So please, could you tell us about your issues? I mean, your health problems, what kind of pain it was, what kind of symptoms? Because sometimes we think that if we have a headache or if we have a pain on our back, that it's not connected with food. You know, it's not so easy to connect it.
It's very difficult to connect it. It really is difficult to connect it, intensely difficult to connect it. You can keep thinking, it must be something I'm eating. It must be something I'm eating. And nothing else is helping. It must. And then even though you're looking at what you're eating, you don't see the connection. I was sure it was something I'm eating. You know, you keep sort of curating and adjusting your diet and putting things in out of the diet to try to figure out which food is it. It's got it. So even when you suspect the food, the oxalate aspect isn't there. And that goes partially back to the fact that you don't know that which foods are high in oxalate. So there's no way you can think high oxalate foods and symptoms. And then there's a lot of delay in eating the food. You know, when it gives you a symptom, sometimes the symptoms aren't going to come for 20 years. You could be damaging your health day in, day out, and
you like didn't okay. You didn't feel it. I mean,
I did have symptoms after you learn that oxalate makes you better, like getting oxalate out of your diet. After you learn what gets better, it's based on what gets better, and then you go back and you think about your past, and you think, my God, that was because of the oxalate. That was because of the oxalate. Like, it starts to come together afterwards, kind of in the autopsy. You can see what went wrong with your diet and your health once you recognize, because you get oxalates out of your diet, and eventually things will get better. So you're asking about the things in my health that were connected to my toxic, healthy diet, because it's really the popular health foods that we're all saying are good for us are really not safe to eat in these huge amounts and routinely the way we're being told to eat them. So that's the big message. And the amazing learning path can be changing your diet, understanding that you're no longer eating oxalates and seeing things. For me, I had a sleep disorder. My brain could not settle down and stay asleep. So in the sleep test, it showed the brain was waking up 29 times every single hour, which is 2 minutes of sleep at a time. So that had been going on. Nothing was fixing it, no drugs or anything. I got on this diet, and I went on it when I realized through, now I recognize when I was eating oxalates and didn't. And when I added back kiwi into my diet, my arthritis came back really bad, joint pain and swelling that would especially bother me at bedtime. And I lay in bed all achy, swollen and discouraged and thinking, why is this back again? I had this terribly in my 20s when I was a vegetarian and vegan. I had 20 years of really bad.
So you had this in your history that you're vegetarian.
Yes. Yes, I went vegetarian for 8 years, and then I was vegan for 8 years. So it was 16 years of a nutritionally deficient diet and eating all the healthy things that I was, growing in gardens and so on, fresh cooked foods, vegetables and so on, and doing the perfect diet.
Yeah, I think that that's the main problem in Poland as well, that we, in mass media, we have a one big picture that fruits and vegetables that are very, very healthy, and that's the basic of our diet, and we should eat them a lot. And in Poland, it's like that meat is not good because it's very acidic. You have to be careful. You have to be vegetarian or vegan because it's really good for your health. And that's why many people think that it is a good idea to do like that. And many people very young, in a young age, because they think they are going to save the planet, because meat eaters are the killers. You know what I mean? So
yeah, that's the story everyone around the planet is getting. And this is the same story now. It's like, it doesn't matter what country you're in anymore. It's one giant media, one giant message. It's everywhere. And there's a couple of really important points in what you're saying. And one is, we're told it's so beneficial it's morally superior to eat these vegetables because they don't have bloods and eyes and parents. And meat has eyeballs and parents, so that must be terrible. And so you can't even have a rational conversation with someone who's in a morally superior position already. Now, and the other thing is, it's not just the media from today. The very first bite of solid food you were given by your parents was given with a message that this kid needs vegetables. And then you go to school and everyone believes that you need to eat vegetables to grow healthy and strong. And your very first teachers will tell you the same thing your parents told you. So it's more than media. It's a giant Western cultural assumption that these plants are good for us. And the history of that is really interesting, because even in recent history with the world wars, there was a lot of government propaganda getting people to grow and eat vegetables at home because there was difficulty with railroads and trucking, and because all the energy was going into making planes and bombs and the war effort. And so people needed to be more self-sufficient. So the governments were telling their citizens to grow vegetables and live on those so that we could put all our bigger resources into battling the war. And so there's always been, for a long time now, a connection with being a good person and eating your vegetables.
Yeah. Okay, so could you please, I know that you have a lot of information on your website. It's really full packed because I, checked and I've sent my audience there. But could you please explain what is oxalate? What is it exactly? I mean, maybe not in a very specific way, but what is it and what kind of food should we avoid?
Yeah, oxalate's a little acid that's easily made in nature. Plants make a lot of it, and so certain plants make more than others. And there's a subset of the plants that we're eating that have a lot of oxalate. Now, oxalate is often said oxalates plural, because it's really many different forms of this acid called oxalic acid, this little 2-carbon acid, and it grabs minerals and chelates them into salts and creates crystals when they dry. And in the body, they can create crystals too. So you're eating, actually the plants make both the acid, oxalic acid, and the oxalate crystals that are usually calcium oxalate crystals. These crystals are very hard. They're harder than bones and teeth. They literally wear down the teeth. If you chew on a lot of high oxalate foods with crystals in it, literally it wears down the teeth. And so it's really rough to eat the crystals. They can be like sandpaper and abrasive in your body, in the digestive tract. And then the acid that comes with them, or that becomes from them, and the stomach acid probably can liberate a little bit of this salted oxalate back into oxalic acid, the ion, and then that molecule easily just gets into your bloodstream. So the acid gets into your body. At some point in the blood or in the tissues, it will grab calcium or other minerals like iron and magnesium and bind them up and steal those minerals. So they'll bind them in the foods so you can't absorb them from foods. So it lowers the minerals in foods and causes foods to be mineral deficient. And the one that comes in just as the acid lowers the minerals in your blood and in your tissues and causes them to be mineral deficient too. So you get a dietary impact and a body impact on stealing minerals out of your system. That's really quite terrible to start creating these mineral deficiencies in tissues. But then it can get stuck anywhere where the body has inflammation, infection, injury. When a cell is making the new cell, the baby cell, it's reproducing, the tissues are healing and doing what they do every day to replace themselves. That state of forming a new cell is also very sticky to the oxalate. So oxalic acid gets hung up in tissues that are regenerating and inflamed and infected, and you can start getting deposits in your body tissues. So oxalate in foods is coming from so many popular foods: silver beet, beet greens, spinach. Those are the greens, just those three greens. All the other greens are low in oxalic acid and crystals. And then there's potatoes and sweet potatoes and arrowroot, cassava, what?
Almonds?
The nuts, almonds. Almonds are crazy high. It's very bioavailable, which means the oxalic acid gets into your bloodstream. Cashews, peanuts. Those are the three worst of the nuts that are very bioavailable, commonly used, and get into your body. Dark chocolate is another one. And usually dark chocolate and almonds are in the same food because you're doing ice cream or something with almonds. And like nuts and chocolate are in everything these days. The snack bars, the energy drinks, the desserts, the sweets, the treats, the this, the that.
And coffee and tea?
Tea is pretty high, and coffee is not.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a blog post on my website about coffee because there's a group from Poland who published a stupid article pretending coffee is high. And they produce some bad stuff. And so read that coffee post on my website. If you're like science, it's more about the geekiness of them using the wrong technique and then making all kinds of mistakes, because it's based on how much the data that they're measuring. When they measure food in the lab, it's based on, they report it as how many milligrams of oxalic acid and so on per 100 grams of food. So with dried coffee, instant coffee powder, per 100 grams, there's a lot of oxalate. But when you make a cup of coffee, you use about 1 to 2 grams of crystals. The instant powder is very light and fluffy. You use a tiny amount. You'd have to drink a cup of powder to make coffee a high oxalate food. But that's why they call instant coffee high oxalate, because per 100 grams, there's a lot in there. But from a portion standpoint, there's hardly any oxalate in coffee.
Okay.
Yeah.
And because many people, I think they've heard that if you have gout, you have it because of meat. If you are a meat eater, you are you should avoid it because it's high in oxalates. But when I hear you, listen you, I can say that it's opposite, you know, because so many vegetables are very, very high in oxalates. And I actually had the same problem because I've had a lot of vegetables and I had a lot of problems with my health and a lot of bloating, a lot of digestion issues and pain of headache, you know, pain everywhere. And when I start to introduce only meat and fat, it was my rescue, you know, it saved my life. And I've also been a vegetarian for many years. That's why I always said that we should avoid dogmas, because many people said that you should eat vegetables, but it's not true.
Yes, it's not true. And the vegetables that have the oxalate, it's hard to get it out of there. Some people pretend if you just cook it, it gets rid of the oxalate. And because it will get rid of some other toxins. If you soak things or cook them properly, you can lower phytates, which is another chemical in foods that can bind calcium. So people like to pretend, well, if it helps phytates, it helps oxalate. So you'll hear all around, oh, you just need to cook it. And people say, oh, it was my raw spinach that did this to me. No, it's your spinach that did it to you. All the spinaches, the cooked, the blended, whatever, it's all high oxalate. So that's something someone was asking about. So I want to make sure we address that it's not better if it's cooked usually. I mean, you can boil broccoli, which is much lower in oxalate, and throw out the water and lower it by maybe half. And Brussels sprouts, you can do that too. So there's a little bit of help if you boil and throw out the water. But most people aren't doing that with their spinach. You don't boil spinach. You can't help spinach, forget it. It's just not worth eating. It's just toxic. And we've known it's toxic for 100 years and pretending otherwise. So it's really pitiful that we're being told vegetarianism and any amount of these high oxalate foods is okay. They're not.
And what do you think, that everybody should avoid oxalate, or only people who have issue? Who should?
Well, people you don't love and want to see die in pain and early, let them eat oxalate. But everyone else probably would do better without it.
So even if we are in a good shape, we don't have any issue, we should avoid them. Well, or eat them in small amount.
It's kind of like the smoking question. You know, not everybody got cancer when they smoked. So should they smoke or not? Because they got away with it and they lasted for 25 years and they didn't get a lung problem. Is it good for them to smoke? It's similar. A similar question where we don't know how badly it's going to mess up your life and health and how soon it is. But we do know that your body would perform better if it wasn't being poisoned with every meal. And you would feel better. You'd have better muscle mass. You'd have a better bone mass. You'd probably avoid the diseases of aging and like osteoporosis and so on. So anyone who really wants to be independent as an older person and wants to really aim for that productive, healthy elder years, absolutely should learn about oxalates and reduce them from their diets significantly and forevermore. It's not something, oh, well, I'll just get rid of oxalates for a few months or a few years and then I can eat whatever I want again. I don't think there's any point where eating a toxin is a great advantage to you.
I understand. And could you recommend us if it's better to stop just right now? I mean, you know, because I've read that you can have a lot of issue if you stop just right now to eat oxalate at all. So could you recommend us the plan of how to get rid of oxalates slowly, or how to prevent of Herxheimer reaction or something like that?
Yeah, so because it gets stuck in your tissues, it gets stuck in your bone marrow, your bones, your thyroid gland, various tissues, joints and tendons. And at some point, the body will get rid of that for you if you stay off the oxalate. So there's this long period of recovery that's down the road for people like me who was eating too much high oxalate foods for many decades. And so it's important to not rush into this. If you've been eating high oxalate foods like spinach a lot and almonds a lot, chocolate, sweet potatoes, and then, or you know, if you went on one of these gluten-free diets that are high in any of the gluten-free flours are mostly high in oxalate, the quinoa, the teff, the buckwheat, these things that some people start using more when they're on gluten-free. So if you've been doing those things, you want to take your time and pick out the I've got a list on my website, and there is the book, and luckily within 2 years there's going to be a Polish language version.
Oh, it was actually my next question, because I wanted to have this book in my store, so it would be lovely.
Because you're gonna have to wait. It's going to be at least probably 20 months at least. But
okay, but it's worth. So
yes.
I would like to have it.
I just learned that on Friday that somebody's offered a decent proposal to take it in Polish. So
great.
I'm really happy about that one. It's going to be exciting to have that. But it takes a while to translate and print a book, so it's not instant.
I just wanted to ask if I can do it, but if you have already somebody,
you can people can wholesale order a case of 24 books at a time from the U.S. publisher. And it depends on the country's rules about where they can be sent to. So certain countries don't let foreign language books in easily. So, but you can check with the Random House, the publisher, and I can give anybody the link if they need it. In my weekly newsletter, they can get that.
I checked your book and wanted to buy via Amazon, because it's possible to buy in English, so I can do this now, and I can recommend to people who are foreign languages, but in Polish it would be great. So it's great. I'm very happy, and I know that we just run out of time, but I would like to ask you if you are on ketogenic diet or carnivore, or you don't check your ketones just to avoid oxalates or other maybe lectins or other fruits and vegetables. How is it look like? What do you eat?
So for my diet is not necessarily the one for everyone, but I think this could generally work, especially for people with a history of oxalate poisoning. For one, you need to customize what you're eating for your own immune system. If you have had a lot of oxalate in your past, there's a chance that you've developed intolerances and food sensitivities and allergies. And if foods increase your pain or cause you to have skin breakouts or something, if you can tell, you should definitely be careful to not irritate your immune system by eating foods that bother you. So definitely customize your diet. I am primarily eating fish and animal foods, with fish being the main one because I've now got a beef allergy, and that's another whole story. We can talk about how the oxalate release from the body keeps the immune system busy trying to get rid of crystals from your tissues, and that can increase your chances of your immune system continuing to be reactive to foods. More and more foods even can occur. So you don't want to do this too quickly. You're taking foods out gradually and getting down to a diet. I need some carbs here and there. I don't do a lot, but I'll use some fruit, some papaya. If I could do it, I would do pineapple and things like that, baked apples, to get some carbohydrates. Too much ketogenic all the time is stressful on the liver, can make it hard to sleep, can give you leg cramps, and I'm very prone to that. As is many of us with oxalate damage. It's hard for you, some of us with oxalate damage, to keep our blood sugar high enough and keep our muscle glycogen high enough. I don't believe sugar and carbs are the enemy necessarily, but many of us need to train our metabolism to live on zero carbs or low carb and do like zero carb carnivore for a while. But often a couple of months of that, if you've been working on controlling your carb intake and only being very aware, not getting caught up in a sort of carb addiction cycle, then they're actually beneficial to use in a deliberate way to put some carbs back into the diet. But it's a process where one type of diet is working well to help train your metabolism and help you move to into good metabolic health. But the oxalates are continually stressing your metabolic health because they're impacting the glandular function, they're impacting cellular function, the mitochondria, the enzymes can all be interfered with oxalate. So it's important that you don't force yourself to sign up for a certain tribe and try to be part of that. You want to be part of the tribe of you and think about what you really need and continually challenge yourself to do the best you can to eat a low toxicity diet that keeps you well enough that you sleep well and you function well. And that's not always easy to do when you're poisoned with oxalate. But I highly recommend that people focus on getting enough protein. Every meal should have a big chunk of protein in it, preferably, 200 grams or more of a meat type food in a meal does a beautiful job of maintaining your muscles and bones and satiety and help your body heal. I have good muscle tone on my body because I eat fish. The omega-3s and the proteins are very good for muscle maintenance and development. So I am mostly carnivore and encourage people to do that, but even vegans can be benefited from a low oxalate diet. There's no requirement to benefit from knowing about oxalates. You can be on any old diet you want. If you want to stay vegan, fine, but don't eat all that spinach and nuts.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's depends on where you are mentally, emotionally, and so on, what you're doing with your diet. I'm not telling anyone to do my diet. I think you need to do your diet.
Yeah, that's very good said. And could you please tell me one thing, because I've heard and I've read on your website that also in broth you can find some oxalate. And I recommend, for example, GAPS diet when the broth is, the main course. And I recommend very low in histamine, because, if you cook it very long time, you are going to have a very high in histamine. But could you please tell me what we can do to make this oxalate, as little as possible? I mean, in broth. Because I didn't realize that in broth we can have oxalate. I know that I can put, for example, the carrot in it, but what kind of procedure I can do to lower the oxalates in the broth?
So what's in the broth that's connected to oxalate is hydroxyproline and glycine. These amino acids in broth are converted in the body, in the liver, into oxalate when they're metabolized. So when there's too many going around, and especially if there's a lot of inflammation in the body, if there's obesity or illness or reacting to oxalates where you're high inflammation and you're low in B1 or B6, the vitamins in the body, you produce more oxalate from these connective tissue amino acids. So collagen, broth, gelatin, all of those can become oxalate in the body to some degree or another. And it's not necessarily a huge amount, but we really do see in people's lives when they're overdoing the collagen, the broth, and so on, they get oxalate symptoms from that. So we don't really know all the ins and outs of that, and you would never know in one person all the factors, but getting enough B vitamins is important, and limiting your daily broth consumption to 2 cups a day or less, and not using gelatin and collagen on top of that. So you have to use a reasonable amount. So this is also a message lost on everybody. They think if a little bit of broth is good, then more is better. Not true. Broth is excellent. I truly love broth. I think it really helps us maintain connective tissue, but you need a lot more than just that to maintain connective tissue. Just a little of that will do, plus all the other right things, and your metabolism will be able to maintain better connective tissue.
Yeah, I think that it's really important to observe our body and how we treat ourselves, because we eat and we feel how do we feel after eating, and that's the most important thing. Because if somebody is going to eat a lot of eggs, for example, which is good for someone, but the other person can have a lot of issue after eggs. So I think that
yes,
we have to consider that no perfect diet for everybody is
well, and when it comes to things like too much broth and too much oxalates, this is something that you only see over the course of several weeks or months, where you've been doing this consistently and you feel worse or you're not getting better. Whereas something where it's an intolerance, sometimes you can tell within 20 or 30 minutes of eating that you just feel bad, or you feel out of it, or spacey, or tired, or hungry, or craving any kind of odd feeling of, short or close. That might be more of an immune intolerance thing versus this sort of toxicity problem with oxalates and broth, where you start to feel, wow, I've been doing my broth every day for 2 months and my sweet potatoes, and I just don't feel great. I'm not sleeping well. I'm not thinking well. That's the more the toxicity piece. It's not like, oh, I ate one thing. Although once you stop eating oxalates and then you add back in, some people can tell immediately that that was a mistake.
Okay. So because I wanted to ask you about the symptoms that we can feel just immediately sometimes, the symptoms after eating, but also it can be after a couple of days that we add something and we can feel dizzy or we have a headache. So I think that we should avoid this kind of day off. I think, you know, that
yeah,
okay,
right.
So maybe today I can eat it.
The cheat day, yeah.
Yeah, cheat day,
days with oxalate is a terrible idea. It's really, for a lot of reasons, it's a terrible idea with the oxalate poisoning. But in the symptom thing, with oxalates, it takes a little while to get it into your bloodstream. So it would be at least an hour to 4 hours after you've eaten it where you might notice that you suddenly have a twitch on your face, or your ears turning red, or you're suddenly restless or angry or upset or lost your focus. You know, these neuro symptoms of inflammation can occur an hour to 3 or 4 hours after the meal. So if you're getting an acute reaction to the oxalate in your diet, it would be a few hours later. If you're getting like chronically too much every day, you just generally start feeling like you're falling apart. That sometimes takes weeks to build up with the oxalate part.
And what do you think about lectins and other, you know, components of vegetables and fruits? Because I know that we can find other components which can be also harmful for us.
Yeah, there are many chemicals that plants make that we're not that equipped to deal with. And lectins are a great example. With lectins, you can soak things. Lectins come in seeds, nuts, and fruits. And often it's concentrated in the seed and the skin on fruit. So if you peel your cucumber, you're probably fine. Same with squash. If you don't eat the seeds and the skin. But the real thing with lectins is they need high heat, very high heat, to be disarmed. And with seeds, you have to soak them 3 to 4 days and then use a pressure cooker and use very high heat to cook legumes, which is pretty hard to do with a peanut, for example. I don't know how bad the peanuts are in lectins, but lentils are very high in lectins.
Lentils, yeah.
Lentils, and they're low in oxalate. So that's too bad. They're not any good on the low oxalate diet unless you're willing to soak them for 3 or 4 days and use the pressure cooker and eat them very soft. And that's what they do in India. They use a lot of lentils in India, but it's always soft, gruel, thin, very highly cooked, because they know traditionally how to make them safer. So with phytates, same thing. If you soak for just a day, you lower the phytates. And the saponins, sometimes you can wash some of them off. But generally, if you already have gut inflammation, you've used NSAIDs, you use antibiotics, you've used too much fiber or whatever, these plant chemicals are not doing you any good. And oftentimes that's why people need to go all the way to carnivore. Their system is now reacting to these strange chemicals and struggling, and the gut is not rebalancing and not healing completely. And so that's the beautiful thing about going to a plant-free diet for people, that's a therapeutic elimination approach. And what you're eliminating is hundreds of chemicals plus the fiber.
Yeah, that's true. You know, for me, it was all very problematic to digest it. That's why I stopped with all plants, and I have very, very big improvements. So that's why I recommend this kind of diet to many people, not because it's a dogma, you know, but it's just to check if they are going to be better, because that's the most important thing in our life, to be better and better, not to stay in a dogma.
Yes, and as you say, it's a sort of diagnostic tool. Get on this approach, do this elimination diet. It'll inform you. It'll help you learn about your body and what might be going on.
Yes, that's true. Okay, Sally, last question. Do you have space for patients, or can my audience get to you, I mean, by email or
yes,
training?
You can write an email to my system, my website at help@sallynorton.com, and join one of the group meetings where you can meet other people, and then I give a presentation and try to explain things based on people's pre-submitted questions, and you'll get a lot of handouts from going to that class. It gives a lot of details of things you can do to help yourself. And then if you still need help after coming to a group meeting, then you can get an appointment with me if you need it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your time. I think that maybe not so long, but very, packed, full of information. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm waiting for your book until now.
Oh my gosh. So let me know when you get the book. And thank you so much for sharing this with your folks who trust you. It's, to me, once you learn about oxalates, it seems like we're obligated at some level to let other people know who are looking for answers. So anyone out there looking for answers, hang out with us, because you're in for a treat.
It's hope. I always said that we still have hope, and we shouldn't, just staying and crying, because that's the worst thing which we can do. So thank you very much for your work and for your time. Have a nice evening.
Thank you too.
Bye bye.
Thank you. You do the same. Bye bye.